Vicki, I just want to say thank you for everything that you have been doing to make this exhibition and this day possible. And I also want to acknowledge Felicia Oddie as director of the library. Felicia has been involved in Things Juglaris for a long time as well, going back 25 years. We started a lot of the Juglaris project just shortly after she came here. So it's just great to be back here. I want to thank you especially, Vicki, your husband, Alan, and also the library staff. You know, sometimes when you call a place, you don't always get the best reception of the live people that were there. First of all, sometimes we just get voicemail, right? Or we just get a message. When I call the library here, I've always gotten a live person and also a nice person, always willing to help. And that really says a lot about what is happening here each and every day as you welcome patrons who seek to continue their knowledge and their education. It really makes for a congenial mood and atmosphere. Want to say I'm so glad to be here today as we honor and celebrate the life and career of the Italian painter Tommaso Juglaris, as well as everything else at this library. As I get underway, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. When you came in, did you get a copy of the talk today? Vicki, are there additional copies? Can you grab some? I want to make sure everyone has one in hand. As I prepared today's talk, I kept on thinking of my own custom as a minister. I always made sure my sermons were in printed versions so that if people had trouble hearing what I was saying, they could still get the gist. And they could either listen to me or simply read the text and know what was being said. You know, a minister always wants to get heard, right? A speaker always wants to get heard and the message communicated. And so the written text allows us to do that as well. Now, I do want to warn you, there are some typographical errors in the printed text that you'll have before you. Probably about a dozen is why I estimate, in spite of the fact that I was so meticulous in making sure it was errorless. But, you know, my grandmother, a Polish grandmother, used to always say, Geoffrey, the dumb ones won't notice, the smart ones won't say anything. The problem is that I do notice these things, and I'm always tempted to say things too. I don't know where you're at, but in any event, as you look at the copy, you'll see some slight variations maybe from even what I'm saying, but you'll be able to, I think, follow along pretty closely. Well, the close of Juglaris' creative and eventful life came a century ago in 1925. He died actually in January 1925. Yet he left behind for us all a rich legacy, which we, in marvelous part, see all about us today. Not only in this room, but in the upper reaches of the entrance to this library, a really grand entrance. Truly worthy of admiration and appreciation thanks to his creative versatility, Juglaris' legacy is further narrated by the exhibition that we have all around us that Vicki was so instrumental in bringing all together for us. So I just want to thank her again for that. 2 decades ago, this library observed the centennial of its building. That was, I believe, in 2004. I delivered a 2-part, 2-hour lecture on Tommaso Juglaris' career in this same reading room. We had so very recently started learning about the extraordinary breadth and reach of Juglaris' artistic career, and I was carried away with enthusiasm. Today, I am no less enthusiastic about Juglaris as human being and artist, but I've learned to be just a little bit more concise, confident in the other resources that are now so widely available, not only here in this exhibition, but also online. And you'll find some codes here that you can use to connect to some of the sites, not only about Juglaris, but also some of the efforts underway just to make sure the resources are in place to maintain this building and all of its art. Well, today, again, I just want to share with you some of the highlights and contours of Juglaris' artistic life and career, which I hope you'll find as fascinating as I perennially have. Tommaso Juglaris was born on October 9th, so this is his birth month, in 1844 in Montpellier, Italy, at the outskirts of Turin. It's literally just at the edge of the city. Situated in the Piedmont region at the foot of the Alps along the Po River, Juglaris' birthplace is not all that far different from the borders, present day, of both France and Switzerland. His surname hardly sounds Italian at all, and this may be the result of both a French and Savoyard heritage that was true for a lot of families in that region. In fact, the Savoy region had its own language at one time, so the family name may reflect that fact. Even though Juglaris was born in this region of Italy that was a little different from the rest of Italy, he regarded himself as thoroughly and proudly Italian. Juglaris' family, which included several brothers, originally was benestante, in other words, well off, well-to-do. Yet the progressive unification of Italy, which took place in the middle of the 19th century into the last third of the century, led to both political and economic turmoil, which was financially devastating for Juglaris' family. As a result, Juglaris' parents, dealing with failed agricultural investments, which were their source of wealth, had to move their household, now faced with considerable poverty, to an apartment in Turin. The upside of this for young Tommaso was his introduction to an intimate circle of family friends that included several noted Turinese artists who soon asked him to model. As these artists came to know young Tommaso, they noticed in him a precocious talent for drawing, which they encouraged. Ultimately, as Tommaso Juglaris got older, he pursued his obvious calling by enrolling at the Albertina Academy, an outstanding school of fine arts. Now, sadly, Juglaris' poverty got in the way of his studies, forced from economic desperation to work as a sign painter during the day to support himself and help out his family. He enrolled in night classes, but even then, there were problems. His threadbare clothing and lack of fresh art supplies made him an object of ridicule. When he fainted from hunger, others, including his teachers, assumed he was a staggering drunk. A tense physical altercation followed when an eminent professor, Andrea Castaldi, insulted him. When I was personally tracking Juglaris' life in Turin, I ended up going to the Albertina Academy looking at the academic records that were preserved. And in those records, of course, Juglaris' own enrollment listed. There was a notation in Castaldi's hand next to one of those elements of his academic record. I don't speak Italian and never studied Latin, to my misfortune, when I was in school, and as a consequence had to turn to the registrar and his assistant to ask, what does this mean? They took one look at the notation Castaldi had with flourish put there, and they started laughing, really laughing. The words were nota bene, note well, a very bad student. Obviously, a century and a half later, without losing empathy for Juglaris as the struggling student artist that he was, we can all laugh at what could only have been a deeply fraught juncture and humiliating impasse for him. Leaving the Albertina Academy without graduating, Juglaris apprenticed himself to two locally renowned artists and muralists, Paolo Mogari and also Gaetano Lodi. As their unpaid or barely paid apprentice, I think Basically, all he got was room and board in those early years. He assisted them in extensive mural painting for a number of churches and public buildings across northwestern Italy. Amid this work, Juglaris learned the requisite skills and techniques that were to stand him so well in the rest of his career ahead. On one early morning, while alone on a scaffold, decoratively painting a grand room in Turin's royal palace, Juglaris met King Victor Emmanuel II, who spryly climbed the scaffold to observe firsthand Juglaris' technique at work. The king had kind words for Juglaris, encouraging him in his studies. And it was a thrilling, unforgettable moment for Juglaris. You know, hearing about this episode just reminds me of how we can make a difference in the lives of young people. How important it is to be reaching out, providing encouragement for the road ahead. Well, Juglaris looked for simultaneous opportunities beyond what he was doing as an apprentice to develop himself as a painter in the parallel field of fine arts, as opposed to simply decorative arts. Along with collegial endorsements, a strongly painted portrait of a friar executed at his own easel, on his own time, served as an entry card into Turin's elite circle of artists. The circle was known for its glittering and social gatherings attended by Italy's finest nobles and princes who enjoyed mingling with an art crowd. Some things just never change, eh? The rich always want to hang out with the arty people. Not a life they want to pursue, but it's nice to hang out with those folks. And so it was at one of these gatherings that Juglaris, wearing the one suit that was in good shape, the only good outfit he had, it was at this gathering, wearing that one good suit, that he danced a quadrille with the future Queen Margherita of Italy. She gives her name to the pizza, the Margherita pizza that we commonly enjoy. It was another thrilling moment for him. There's a portrait of her in one of the cases back there. You may want to take a look. There she is with her crown and all her regal glory. Although too frequently going unacknowledged, Juglaris ended up sharing in some important commissions, as well as obtaining a few of his own. His collaborative work on the grand staircase of Turin's City Hall Municipal Palace survives to this day. My wife and I were able to take a look at it just 2 years ago or so when we were visiting in Italy. So do religious murals that Juglaris painted in churches scattered across the Italian and French Savoy regions. Juglaris also emerged as the foremost set painter for Turin's Royal Theatre. Now, all this was positive. All this was promising. Yet, as the Savoy dynasty consolidated its rule over the entire Italian peninsula and moved its royal capital from Turin to Rome, private and public funding for new local projects was drying up. Given his own perennial dire financial straits, an ambitious Juglaris began to think that he might better flourish elsewhere. Consequently, although he spoke no French, he set his sights on Paris, which at that time was the art capital of the world, or to be less provincial about it, the art capital of the transatlantic world. Juglaris moved there in June 1871. In some respects, Juglaris' timing could hardly have been worse. Paris was in a state of chaos and despair. Only the year previously, France under Napoleon III had lost its war against Bismarck's unifying Germany. At that time, both Italy and Germany were unifying as nations. Well, in any event, there was war with Germany. Germany defeated the French, led to chaos and more. The French emperor and empress were deposed, replaced by a republic. Yet that was not to be the end of it. Radicalized workers seized Paris and established the famous or infamous Paris Commune. However, conservative and reactionary forces soon mobilized to take Paris back. Indeed, just a few weeks before Juglaris' arrival, the radical Paris Commune had been brutally crushed through hand-to-hand combat with corpses strewn in street after street. In his memoirs, Juglaris recounts buildings still smoldering from set fires. Paris's City Hall, you have a picture of it, I think, in your text there, was one vast ruin. Thus, business in the French capital was not as usual. Nevertheless, Juglaris made his way through the chaos and found work to do, beginning with theater set painting, which he had done already, and set design and ceramics design. From this initial start, he shifted over the next years to mural work and decorative painting at the famous Paris Opera House, the Théâtre du Châtelet, and a Parisian palace or two. Another lucrative realm for Juglaris proved to be lithographic illustration, utilizing new printing processes. He was retained on an extended and lucrative contract to illustrate Charles-Auguste Razenet's massive and comprehensive history of costume, which is still cherished as a reference work on costume today. You'll find a copy of it, a reprint of it, in the back case there. You may want to take a look at it. Although Juglaris prospered with this commercial work, he still hungered to be a greater artist, focused on the fine arts. Commercial art paid the bills, decorative art was a joy, but he wanted to have a chance at fine arts as never before. To this end, he resumed studies in Paris as a night student at the acclaimed École des Beaux-Arts. His professors there were the eminent Parisian painters Alexandre Cabanel and Jean-Louis Gérôme, who were at the very height of their careers. They were famous in those days. Venturing outside Paris, Juglaris also became a student of the equally admired, if not exalted, Thomas Couture. Meanwhile, Juglaris was also befriended by the artist Camille Corot, who could be counted on for critique and artistic advice. All of Juglaris' disciplined and concentrated study bore fruit. He was able to successfully submit genre paintings to the esteemed Paris Salon, which annually exhibited hundreds of artists officially approved for the display of their work. To be a Paris Salon painter was an invaluable credential. It meant that an artist had achieved a high degree of technical and aesthetic merit according to the then reigning academic standards. Juglaris' best-known paintings for the Paris Salon: The Invasion, Offering to the God Lares, and Paolo Veronese at Venice, or Venetian Promenade. Each won Paris Salon honors, enabling Juglaris, after his third ribbon, to exhibit paintings without any advanced juried review. Juglaris enjoyed his salon successes, an entree into impressive circle of Parisian friends. Beyond Italian compatriots, that circle included luminaries such as Victor Hugo, Guy de Maupassant, Adolphe Daudet, Camille Saint-Saëns. Yet gratifying it was, as it was to be mingling with these kinds of people, literary, musical, art world giants. Juglaris was reaching midlife, bothered about his own future. How might he find a way to entirely free himself from slavery to commercial art in order to focus his time and talents more exclusively on the fine arts, or even the decorative arts? Thus, very attractive to him was a surprisingly generous offer from the American publisher Louis Prang of Boston. From the opposite side of the Atlantic, Prang proposed to hire Juglaris as artistic director for his publishing house on a half-time basis at a high salary. Although he didn't speak a word of English and knew little about America, Juglaris decided it was an offer too good to refuse. Now we know sometimes how those offers turn out, eh? Well, in any event, in late summer 1880, Juglaris set out, crossed the Atlantic for Boston via New York. Landing in our nation's largest city, Juglaris was both impressed and dismayed by the wealth and squalor of Gilded Age American life, which immediately confronted him. Nevertheless, he kept an open mind and an open heart. He never ceased to appreciate America for its virtues. But once in Boston, his further experience with praying proved profoundly disappointing and frustrating. As others have testified, and Juglaris quickly learned firsthand, praying had a mercurial and tyrannical personality. In no uncertain terms, he informed Juglaris that he was now company property, owned as an artist. Praying demanded that Juglaris paint his portrait gratis, as well as curtail any outside artistic activities. With a good measure of spleen, Praying sought to nix an invitation Juglaris had already received to exhibit in Boston 2 Paris Salon paintings that he had brought with him from Europe. Additionally, Praying complained that Juglaris's artistic style was too European for American tastes and thus ill-suited for the design of the Christmas and New Year's cards that were the company's stock in trade. When Juglaris quit Praying's employ, after just 6 months, the publisher vowed that the Italian artist would never work in Boston again. In fact, the vitriolic Praying exercised his considerable business clout to prevent Juglaris from securing jobs. Thus, to survive in America, in the face of such onus, Juglaris had to remove himself from Boston, make that move as he did to Philadelphia. At that point, it looked like Juglaris had left Boston for good. However, after the good part of a year away, which brought its own share of struggles, Juglaris received an unexpected invitation to return. The person proffering the invitation to Juglaris was the Boston stained glass manufacturer Donald McDonald. Already well known for his commissioned work at Harvard's Memorial Hall and other places, McDonald was not intimidated by Praying. As gracious as he was fearless, McDonald assured Juglaris that he could offer him ample design work coupled with the freedom to pursue whatever outside projects or creative relationships might suit him. Lured back to Boston, Juglaris found McDonald, in total contrast to Praying, to be entirely true to his word. The two men ended up as lifelong friends and collaborators. Thereafter, Juglaris created no shortage of handsome stained glass designs for New England churches and public buildings, as well as several as far distant as Baltimore and San Francisco. Some of Juglaris' stained glass designs locally survive at Tufts University's Goddard Chapel, at Harvard University's Memorial Hall, and at the Newton Presbyterian Church. While still in the snares of Praying's employ during his first Boston weeks, Juglaris had gladly accepted that invitation to exhibit the Invasion in Paulo Veronese at Venice at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. He had followed this up by showing both paintings at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts during his Philadelphia sojourn as well. Naturally, such presence at 2 major American institutions could only enhance Juglaris' credibility. It definitely facilitated the sale of Paulo Veronese at Venice to a wealthy Pennsylvania oilman. Meanwhile, amid plaudits for the obvious quality of work, the shocking nudity of the barbarian figures depicted in the Invasion had generated controversy. But you know what? This too contributed to Juglaris' reputation and his celebrity as someone to watch. Subsequently, Juglaris was welcomed into an open competition for a new post as teacher in residence for the city's freshly organized Boston Art Club near Copley Square. As reported by newspaper and also by his own memoirs, Juglaris won hands down against a bevy of contenders who could not match his talent for figural drawing. Now, just before we started today, my friend Joyce Galantic was challenging a little bit of the figural work that Juglaris did, and I assured her he was the best that Boston had at that time, Joyce, the best. Yeah, there it is. In any event, he got that position an important position, a pivotal position in Boston's art community at that point. And living up to his reputation for the daring, Juglaris promptly introduced along the lines of the European model a theater of the nude where dedicated artists could actually draw from live, bare models. Before Juglaris, that wasn't happening. He made that possible and respectable. So he set the example in this way and led the way. Yet, in 1885, he painted the famously statuesque Mademoiselle Yvonne nude, which promptly installed in Boston's Lockover restaurant, remained on public view for the next full century and a quarter. We have a rendition of her in the corner there. In the corner, you may want to take a look at Mademoiselle Yvonne. She now is the source of a restaurant. Lockover's closed, but Mademoiselle Yvonne's opened up to succeed Lockover's in Boston. Well, relishing his teaching role and the public esteem that went with it, Juglaris accepted other leading instructional posts, first at the Cowles Art School, which was for almost 30 years an important school in Boston, and then at the new art department of the New England Conservatory. We always think of the conservatory as the great music conservatory, right? But at one point, it had a major art department or art school as well, and Juglaris was called upon to found that and head that. Well, last but not least, Juglaris was recruited to serve as one of the founding faculty members of the fledgling Rhode Island School of Design in Providence. Each week, Juglaris, who lived in Boston's Back Bay, commuted by train from Boston to Providence and back, holding classes in Boston, where he was teaching, but also in Providence at the Rhode Island School of Design. His focus was figural drawing and also other subjects. Along with a fellow junior faculty member, Warren Locke, Juglaris prepared a translation and fresh rendering of Barozzi de Vignola's famous 5 Orders of Translation, which was useful for architects and painters alike. Over the course of the 1880s, Juglaris's earnest students included Childe Hassam, Sears Gallagher, known for his etchings, especially Susan Oakman Woodbury, August Buehler. He was the one who inspired the mariner on Morton's Seafoods. That image was something that Buehler created, Juglaris' student created, and of course, Henry Hammond Gallison. And I'll be talking more about Gallison in just a moment. Although best known for his contributions to commercial art, another remarkable pupil was the physical culture illustrator and champion strongman Gilman Lowe. So you never know where figural drawing is going to take you, but here this physical culturist was interested in studying art and used it to illustrate physical culture magazines before Men's Health was ever invented as a publication. At one time when American-born artists were not well experienced with mural or frieze work, Juglaris was called upon to complete a number of significant decorative commissions. His friezes for the residence of Governor Oliver Ames Jr. in Back Bay, where he had the largest mansion in town, received high praise. So did Juglaris' similar work for the Prescott House in Newton, directly across from Boston College, the campus today. Juglaris went on to win a major competition to paint the 8 monumental muses of the Michigan State Capitol. Unfortunately, when those muses were installed in October 1886, the same month that the Statue of Liberty was dedicated in New York Harbor, there was so much anti-immigrant hysteria due to the recent Haymarket riot in Chicago that Juglaris' name was entirely suppressed. No public mention was made of his name at all. For 100 years and more, Juglaris' work was instead attributed to a Michigan-born artist, Louis Eyes. It took considerable sleuth work to finally win for Juglaris full credit and recognition as he deserved. What happened in Michigan was a precursor to growing tensions also within Boston and New England. Culturally, America was coming of age and becoming more ambivalent, if not resentful, about being too beholden to European traditions in its own taste and style. Established Brahmin Boston was also anxious about its growing immigrant population. The Irish, by Brahmin reckoning, had been bad enough. Now, there was a massive influx of Italians as well, especially Southern Italians, who were regarded with particular suspicion and disdain. But Juglaris, who had wholeheartedly supported the unification of his native Italy, North and South, stepped forward as a stalwart defender of all Italian immigrants and their interests, always willing and prepared to assist those in need. His service to his fellow countrymen and women was so exemplary that the Italian Foreign Ministry offered him a vice consular position in Boston. He refused this, yet he was appreciative when the Italian government conferred on him a knighthood which added to his local stature and influence. Among those whom Juglaris assisted in Boston was Adolfo Apolloni, a young sculptor who would later return to Italy to become the mayor of Rome. During his Boston years, Juglaris met and married a British immigrant, Katie. Together they had a daughter, Mariana. Tragically, however, Katie Juglaris died as a result of pernicious infection arising from childbirth. Moreover, the baby died within the year. Both mother and child are buried in Boston's Forest Hill Cemetery. A bereft Juglaris found solace in hard work, yet in retrospect we can see that this terrible double loss converged with his concern about increasingly negative attitudes towards immigrants like himself, prompting Juglaris to look back more fondly and longingly to his own native homeland. Admittedly, there are still high points in Juglaris' time in the United States. Exhibitions of his work continued to receive favorable reviews. He was also tapped to paint a portrait of First Lady Frances Folsom Cleveland. Moreover, as he dined as a guest of the Clevelands, the president, who was between White House terms, actually prophesied that Juglaris had a brilliant future ahead of him right here in the United States. But storm clouds soon developed, further darkening the horizon. In 1891, New Orleans police chief, who had a notorious reputation for not only being anti-immigrant but also anti-Italian, was slain. A large group of Italians were arrested and jailed, with 11 then summarily lynched by a mob, possibly abetted by civil authorities. The NAACP has called it the largest lynching in American history. This horrendous episode precipitated a diplomatic crisis between the United States and Italy, with the latter threatening to go to war unless justice was done. Given the fact that Italy's Royal Navy was larger than America's at that point, it was not an idle threat. Before matters were diplomatically settled, Juglaris, to the considerable surprise of his Boston and Providence friends, decided to close his household and pack his bags for a return to Italy. It was a precipitous and sad finish to a highly productive and creative decade. Of course, nothing is over until it's truly over. Although Juglaris opened a new chapter of his life in Italy, where he remarried and for a time lived in Florence before settling again permanently in Turin and its surrounding vicinity, he kept in touch with his American students, or should we say they kept in touch with him. Among them was the extraordinary polymath, Henry Hammond Galison, who by Harvard education and training was both a physician and attorney, but also a very capable artist who affectionately regarded Juglaris as his great teacher. Putting on his lawyer's hat, Galison had assumed local civic leadership right here in Franklin as a judge. However, a decade after Juglaris had departed from Boston, Galison also singularly masterminded a project to engage the talents of his former teacher and friend alongside his own in another kind of service to Franklin. At that time, Massachusetts was leading the nation in a building boom of new and improved public library buildings. It's incredible the number that were constructed here in Massachusetts between basically 1890 and 1915. Just explosive growth in libraries. Following an example set by the new Boston Public Library in Boston's Copley Square, town after town across the Bay State was busy erecting new expanded fireproof facilities for growing book collections that were to serve all classes of citizens. Private donations and endowments proved critical in spurring this building boom, this rise of new libraries. Like many other library facilities going up in other towns, it was to stand, this building, as a memorial, in this case, to the sisters' recently deceased parents. It was here in Franklin that Gallisson had persuaded two sisters, daughter of the town's mill owner, to make their own philanthropic contribution to town life by funding the construction of a new library. Well, with the Ray sisters' support, fully aligned behind the project, Juglaris was recruited by Gallisson. And even before that, Gallisson recruited Thomas Skinner of the Boston firm of Rand and Skinner as architect. Skinner was formerly associated with McKim, White, and Mead, the firm that had designed the Boston Public Library. He, as a 28-year-old man, was also involved with other projects, the Mead Building at Mount Holyoke College and also MIT's Naval Building. At Gallisson's behest, Skinner produced a set of unique library plans inspired by an ancient Greek temple. And then Juglaris was invited from far off Italy to join in providing extensive interior decorations. Juglaris, who seems to have been disappointed, if not embarrassed, that he was excluded from the mural work at the Boston Public Library, jumped at this opportunity to display his talents right here. This was a town halfway between Boston and Providence. He had visited this town on various occasions with Gallisson, even during his earlier stay, so it was a town familiar to him. This was, he saw, a great opportunity. In unpublished memoirs, Juglaris confides, and I quote him here, "At the Boston Public Library, there were decorations by Puvis de Chavannes, by John Singer Sargent, and others, but I must do better, especially more pleasing decorations." Clearly, Juglaris approached this commission at the Franklin Library with a keenly competitive spirit. Initially, Juglaris proposed to paint the vast walls of this library's reading room with a mural cycle based on the biblical parable of the prodigal son. However, when Gallisson and library patrons, the Ray sisters, rejected this, Juglaris floated as an alternative the possibility of a mural cycle illustrating the mythological stories of Atalanta in a race with her suitors, and also the Daids, who, for the crime of murdering their own suitors, had been sentenced by Zeus to perpetually carry water through Hades in leaky jugs. Now, I don't know what could have ever prompted Juglaris to suggest these particular themes, but evidently Gallisson and the Ray sisters were not impressed. And so, as a consequence, Juglaris came up with a third proposal, and that was the conception of a Grecian festival depicting a civic holiday in which citizens of all ranks gather in unity, shedding all class differences between them. In light of the building's classical Greek architecture, this third proposal thoroughly satisfied Gallisson and the Ray sisters. Over the next 2 years, Juglaris sketched and painted the sequential scenes of the mural cycle that was to extend 240 feet long and 10 feet high, 12 feet high, making it the largest mural cycle then extant in the United States. Now, there may be other mural cycles that are bigger. Undoubtedly are. Even in Detroit, we have the famous Diego Rivera murals. I think they probably dwarf this in terms of the extent. But at the time, this was the largest mural cycle in existence. Over the next 2 years, then, Juglaris continued to work on this, both in Italy and in the borrowed space of Gallisson's studio in the summer art colony of Annisquam, Massachusetts. And there he developed a highly linear composition to wrap around the four walls of this reading room against a background landscape, groupings of human figures, adding depth, perspective, and balance, create various focal points of interest around this space, drawing us into the sweep of the Murals Festival panorama. In a succession of dynamic scenes, we see different things happening. The beginning of a sacred fire, libations being poured, a sacrificial lamb being prepared, all conjoined with an early morning procession from the city gates that includes somber priests, virtuous and vigorous musicians, and lively dancers. It all culminates with a master of ceremonies, a little bit veiled right now, but still there nonetheless, standing before an enthroned high priest, signaling the start of the actual sacred festival rites as offerings are brought forth to honor the city's patron deity. What is remarkable, if you look around, are the number of figures. 60 full figures, 17 small figures over here, and if we look over here, 7 heads. The other thing that stands out is the individuality of each figure. They're not all the same. There's a lot of attention to detail in these works while keeping them strong in their outline. Now, at one point, Juglaris had an opportunity to display the scheme of his work at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was then located in Back Bay, Boston. They were hung, much as they would appear here. Hundreds of people came to see them. They created a huge stir. There was a lot of newspaper publicity generated. One of the things that stood out about the work was the nudity of so many of the figures. And Juglaris' talent for figural drawing perhaps created a problem here as well with the Ray sisters who had to live in this town. Boston may have become a little bit more sophisticated, but small town life has sometimes always been a little small-minded in its thinking. In any event, we do know, or at least legend tells us, that he was called upon to dress the figures somewhat. I want to say, dressing or not, they still look somewhat exposed in many cases to me. Well, in any event, these were obviously commendable. This was a commendable work. The sisters were pleased enough, Gallison was pleased enough to say to Juglaris that more was needed. This was becoming a real gem of a place, and that was recognized. But how about something for the entrance of the library? And as a consequence, Juglaris was called upon to also paint the 3 friezes that appear there. And of course, we're not only do we have the reading room here as a part of the gem of this place, but also the murals that Gallison painted for the delivery room, the landscape paintings that were installed, and also this double portrait of the Ray family, the Ray couple there, that was ultimately installed about 1911. Well, these are truly beautiful figures. They celebrate the theme of the hours. And in an era when working men and women were agitating for reduced 10-hour workdays at the same wages so that they might enjoy time for other pursuits, there was perhaps a subtle social relevance to the panoply of figures that Juglaris so richly depicted in each frieze scene. Want to note that even though these friezes are sometimes overlooked, that front area entrance doesn't get the circulation of people that it probably did at one point. They continue to just glow as they do, a real source of joy for anyone who saunters into that entrance area. Throughout most of the mural project here at Franklin, Juglaris and Gallison seem to have enjoyed a close and vital partnership, reflecting a long-standing friendship transcending any teacher-pupil relationship. Galison did a wonderful favor to Juglaris in providing him with the opportunity to paint these murals. The spaciousness of the immediate reading room made available by Galison as a vast canvas was beautifully suited for the capaciousness of Juglaris' own talents. Also, as the mural project got underway, Juglaris was loaned by Galison his studio at Annisquam. So this was a great working relationship. But tragically, as the work here reached completion, the relationship between Juglaris and Galison began to fray. In his memoirs, Juglaris contends that Galison did not compensate him as promised for the additional frieze figures. When Juglaris approached the Ray sisters for payment, they demurred, referring him back to Galison, who apparently gave no satisfaction. At that point, it's not clear that Juglaris and Galison were still on speaking terms. What happened here? None of us can exactly know. Galison left no record of any dispute. His wife, Marie Reuter Galison, whose memoirs are entrusted to the libraries at Harvard, makes no mention of any conflict at all. But there in the memoirs of Juglaris, we see him mentioning very loudly, "I didn't get paid. I didn't get paid." There are a number of possibilities as to what happened, and some of these possibilities could have converged. First of all, the whole controversy over the nudity of the figures, that may have alienated the Ray sisters, and even Galison a little bit, who had to bear the brunt of that. Secondly, the costs for the whole Franklin Library project were soaring. Ultimately, the Ray sisters expended $500,000 to see it to completion. In today's dollars, that's about $14 million. A lot of money. As much as Galison wanted to see Juglaris execute the additional grand entrance frieze work, he may have been reluctant to press the Ray sisters for the extra funds needed to pay them for them, as Juglaris had been promised and owed, especially since the sisters wanted to fund an endowment for library maintenance. Finally, not to be overlooked was a potential clash of artistic egos. As the Franklin Library project came to culmination, it galvanized considerable media attention. Beyond Boston newspapers, the New England magazine and the Craftsman magazine did special features on the Franklin Public Library, offering high praise for what Juglaris had accomplished here. Receiving only secondary attention was the total library itself, which reflected Galison's more encompassing vision and drive, and not really mentioned at all were the murals that Galison had done, nor the landscape paintings that he was executing for this library. Juglaris may not have been especially sensitive to the nuances of the situation for Galison. That would have made things worse as well. So ironically, the Craftsman article entitled Two Artist Friends, and there's a copy of it in the case back there, may have been the coup de grace in bringing the Galison-Juglaris friendship to the edge and beyond. After the dedication of the Ray Memorial Building for the Franklin Library in 1904, it was announced in the Boston Globe and recorded in his wife's memoirs that Galison intended to paint a 12-panel mural cycle of his own for the children's reading room downstairs. But that project never came to fruition. What happened? Why not? Galison was always a resolute, determined man. What he said he was going to do, he did. That didn't get done. I'm struck by the fact that in 1910, at the time of Galison's death, there was mention that he underwent a series of debilitating strokes. Galison's health problems may have been mounting for some time, and that may have impacted both his activities, but also his relationship, his friendship with Juglaris. At the same time, nothing can take away from what Galison did for Juglaris and everything they accomplished together right here in this library building. Following completion and dedication of the library, Juglaris did return to Italy. As much as he enjoyed America, New England winters were never to his liking. But he returned at least once to the United States in April 1908 to meet up with old acquaintances. Meanwhile, in Italy, until the First World War, he lived in a large house outside Turin, retired on ample savings from his American career. In his final years, Juglaris made it back to his own hometown of Moncalieri, where he was born, and he took an upstairs apartment adjoining the municipal palace. If you go to Moncalieri, you'll see right behind that municipal palace the spot where Juglaris lived. About town, Juglaris was known as the professor. He welcomed several students, thus kept up a bit of a school. He shared with them a lifetime of skills. Besides regularly exhibiting through the Circle of Artists in Turin, he undertook mural commissions for the train terminal in Turin and also for private residences of several important Italian figures, the writer Armando de Amicis, and also Italy's ambassador to the United States at an earlier day, Baron Edmondo Mayer de Planche. Other subsequent assignments included paintings for a church right there in Moncalieri, also some work at the Royal College, a secondary school maintained by the Barnabite Fathers, and finally, he undertook Stations of the Cross for a church in the lower reaches of Moncalieri, and finally, a memorable self-portrait. On January 16, 1925, Juglaris, who had been widowed for a second time several years earlier, died peacefully. He was attended by a housekeeper. As was his wish, he was buried in the local cemetery. He asked that there be no fuss made. No fuss at all. A bas-relief honoring him, sculpted by one of his friends, was installed on the wall of the mausoleum wall. And the city council just very briefly acknowledged Juglaris with a commemorative resolution. Thereafter, Juglaris could have been entirely forgotten, as so many artists are, yet his body of work, particularly in the United States, was too monumental and significant to be ignored indefinitely. A sequence of events led to notice of his 3 stained glass windows at Tufts University, as well as the Franklin Library murals, so well highlighted in the Craftsman magazine from 1905, and in turn, that facilitated the rediscovery of Juglaris as the artist for the rotunda of the Michigan State Capitol, the 8 muses there. Further upshots were the 2002 installation of a memorial tablet at the artist's final home in Moncalieri, a 2004-2005 international exhibition of his work, which opened at the Michigan Historical Center in Lansing, Michigan, and then traveled to Moncalieri for reopening at the Royal College and also at a cultural heritage organization, Famiglia Moncarese. And with that, a full-color bilingual exhibition catalog, which was issued. Greatly exciting, too, has been the extraordinary 2021 restoration of one of his Paris salon paintings, Paolo Veronese in Venice, owned by the University of Pittsburgh at Bradford, a wonderful documentary, which I think we're going to have a chance to see today, by Emmy-winning documentarians, records the successful efforts to preserve another Juglaris masterwork, thereby reintroducing the artist to a whole new generation of people and a wider public. Of course, residents here of Franklin and its vicinities are truly fortunate to have one of Juglaris' major works right in your own midst. Given the conspicuous themes of civic duties, social democracy, and the importance of work-life balance found in these murals and friezes, they are topically fresh and as relevant as ever, I think, which is an added blessing. Personally, surveying and studying public libraries across the Bay State just over the last week, I have found that not many, if any, can match in sheer magnitude and beauty the art that is on view right here. None except perhaps the Boston Public Library display murals or friezes as magnificent as what we see here. This is a legacy which needs to be preserved and protected for generations to come. So may this historical exhibition inaugurated today, sharing the story of this library and its artists, be an occasion in which we recommit ourselves to ensure that what has been entrusted to us will not be lost for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. What a great talk by Geoffrey. really insightful. I learned a lot. What an extraordinary life. One of those great immigrant stories that I think still keep happening to this day. And we always have to be mindful of that and remember that we're all of that. We all came from that in one way or another. Today, so my presentation is about maybe 20, 25 minutes long. I'm happy to take questions afterwards if there are any things that I haven't described carefully or not. But I'm going to focus on the restoration that we did on the frieze murals in the entrance here of the library. And we carried that work out in the summer of 2023. What I want to say generally, though, before I get going on that, is that most of the murals, everything in here is actually in really pretty good condition. When you look at the big picture and the size and the square footage and heights and lengths and what can happen typically in old buildings. And it's a reminder, as Geoffrey was saying, how important it is that we be mindful of preserving what we have, because it can all be gone very quickly for all sorts of reasons. So as I said, in the summer of 2023, we worked on the murals, and cool signature on one of them, 1904, with his signature. And actually, that little the kind of the J thing is of his last surname there is interesting. That we saw that also at the Michigan State murals, which we worked on actually in the subsequent March of 2024, and I'll get to that later in the presentation. But that symbol is also on those murals, and that's what this thing, that nobody could decipher what that was. But thanks to Geoffrey and his research, it's pretty evident what it was all about. So what I want to talk about first of all is that most of these murals that are in, Europe and North America, in buildings like this, typically are painted on canvas. The artist works in a studio, and it comes from a tradition of not wanting to be like Michelangelo, painting frescoes high up, carrying things up every day, not being able to stand back and look at your work. It's a very difficult situation. And fresco painting in and of itself, which is actually pigment that's applied to a wet plaster layer as you paint, like a watercolor, and it becomes part of that wall, is a very demanding thing. And by about the 17th century or so, artists started trying to get away from that, just because it was so difficult and time-consuming and really demanding. I mean, you had to be really, really good, like Michelangelo, to do that sort of thing. So artists started painting these large mural projects in their studio on canvas. And then they would subsequently be rolled up and brought to a site, and they often even weren't involved in the actual installation. Like Juglaris was not involved in these installations, I'm sure. Even all the library murals, which I actually was part of the teams working on that, on those projects at Harvard back in the 90s and early 2000s. We worked on all those murals. They're all painted the same way, basically oil on canvas. And they're adhered typically with a lead white paint adhesive. And it goes back again to the 17th century in France, where they started using the remains of oil paint that were in these pots and realizing that it made a really good adhesive. And if you think of anybody who has an old house in New England, you think of lead white paint on your exterior or interior of the house, what a tough material that is. And it bonds really well to the plaster, it bonds really well to the canvas. And unless there's something really strange about the situation, they're really difficult to remove. You cannot peel these canvases away from the wall. If you tried to do that, you would destroy the paint on the surface. That's how rigid that adhesive is on the reverse. So all these murals are executed this way, and Juglaris was working very typically the way all mural painters were painting at that time. And here we see a nice view from the scaffolding that we were on as we were working on the murals. So, this detail that you see here on the upper right, you can actually see the adhesive is applied on the wall, possibly on the back of the canvas, but you also see nails. You can see them sort of on the edge of the canvas there. As they put them up, for extra measure, they'll put in some tacks or nails to make sure that it doesn't peel off, because it takes a few days for that adhesive to become, to set and hold everything down. And sometimes you see them over the mural. Whatever it took to sort of stick them to the plaster, they would implement that technique. The hours of labor, which is at that end, was actually, when we did our initial examination, was found to be the mural in the best condition. And one of the remarkable things about it you see is that with those murals is this beautiful gold background, and I'll show some more close-up details of the gold. And these figures painted on that gold background, which gives them just a wonderful presence and extraordinary strength. I mean, the forms are really, really strong. These murals, you have a background with landscapes, so things, it gets a little more sort of diffuse and atmospheric. But there's this, it's a real freeze. I mean, we're really looking at the surface of the wall, and those figures really punctuate those surfaces really beautifully. And here are two more of the friezes. And just to say, these are after conservation treatments, so they're the better images of the work we did, but they present better this way. Now, I was pointing out the gold, and you can actually see that what was used there was actually gold leaf. And you can see the squares here, and the brighter bands that you see, mostly in the vertical direction, are where the two leaves of gold overlap. And in between those, you see some wear and abrasion. And I'll talk about this a little more depth, but this could have happened because of possible cleaning in the past. They may have used materials or cleaning solutions that were a little too strong for the surface and may have wiped it away. It could also have something to do with the fact that the adhesion isn't as good in those areas, and certainly it's clear they're about 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches D square, which is gold leaf. So it's like 23 karat gold leaf. So just the amount of money that went into that in terms of gold is quite significant given the size of those things. And these two images, I just wanted to point out so the gold leaf was, so obviously what he was doing, he was, making sketches, then probably transferring them up to scale on those canvases. Could have been done in a number of different ways, usually grids, and then he would re-sketch it out. But what would have happened here is the gold leaf would have been applied first, and then the painting takes place subsequent to that. And if you were really up close, you would see the paint actually going over the gold along the contours of the composition. But really what I wanted to point out here was just to show the quality of the painterly quality of his work, the beautiful kind of looseness in the hair of the figures, and just a real understanding of anatomy and how to draw the human form. I mean, he was well versed at it at this point. This is 1904. So, he's had a lot of experience doing it, and he's getting very confident in terms of his technique. It's quite beautiful. And, when you're up close to these murals, you realize what a confident and talented artist Juglaris was. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the condition issues that we had to deal with. Like I said, generally speaking, the murals are in really great condition. But you can see on this detail here a bit of flaking paint. And this is not uncommon. And this has to do sometimes with the way the artist painted the image, depending on how he mixed the paints and what he applied over a second layer over the first layer, and whether there was good bonding there. Sometimes it has to do just even with environmental conditions. And that's an extreme situation when moisture can get into a building. But even just the day-to-day life of a building like this, and over the seasons, you get a lot of temperature and relative humidity changes over the course of the year. And we forget that all these materials are going to behave differently to those things. So the paint is doing one thing, the canvas is doing something else, the walls are expanding, contracting in their own way. So they're composite materials. So one of the things we see typically in conservation, and it can be not just paintings and murals, it can be furniture, sculptures, whatever, especially like polychrome sculptures with paint on them, you'll get these condition problems where the materials start kind of fighting each other in terms of what's going to give. And this kind of curling that you see of the paint is not uncommon for, again, as I said, possible materials that he included that causes this shrinkage, or just environmental factors. So one of the most important components of our work is we take the approach that everything that we can salvage on the surface of the mural has to be saved. You don't just and it happened in the past, there was kind of an expedited kind of way of treating things. They might have wiped things off and then just repainted it wholesale. What we're trying to do is actually lay down every bit of paint that we can salvage on the surface. sometimes not as easy as you might think, given that you're on a vertical surface. In the conservation studio, you're working on a painting, you can be on a table, the paint's going to stay put. But in these situations, it gets a little more dicey in terms of you have to be really careful about how you go about doing it. So what we do typically is introduce a variety of adhesives, and those adhesives are chosen on a number of factors, which I won't get into. Sometimes it's compatibility with the paint. Sometimes you want something really strong given the conditions, and it's not easy to get up there again. You have to put up scaffolding again, so you want to use the most appropriate material that will hold the paint down. And here you can see on the upper left, this adhesive is called BIVA 371, and it's been around for about 55 years, and it's an ethylene vinyl acetate component adhesive, which basically it's in a solvent, it's applied with a brush, and it's quite thin, and it flows under those cracks and under the lifting paint. And you're just getting it in there to just penetrate. And sometimes it will take a couple of applications, sometimes 3, depending on how absorbent the paint is to the adhesive. But you want to make sure you get enough of it on there to make sure that you get a good bond. And then the solvent evaporates overnight, and then the next day you can come back in and we have these little tacking irons, literally, that heat up to a certain temperature, which activates the adhesive. The heat also, what it does is it actually makes the paint more malleable. So if you tried to push it down, just on its own, it's just going to crack and break. But the heat helps the paint relax and so you can re-adhere it to the wall. And so this is the sort of the time-consuming and very methodical kind of work that we have to do. People call it tedious. We actually enjoy it, and I guess it's kind of one of those. It's one of those things that you're either into it or you're not. One of the few things that my wife will say about me that's good is that I actually like washing dishes, which is great because it's meditative. I just wash the dishes. But this is like something that we really it's important, but we also like doing it. So that's a good thing in combination. So as I said, this was not an extensive problem. It was only found on a couple of the murals in very isolated areas. So that was all taken care of. So the first part is really preserving all the paint. The second component of the work was removing surface grime. And of course, this is an old building, and there would be soot and grime from pollution and the heating systems. And you can see it's quite black, the material that's coming off. And we use a variety first of all, what we do is we use a dry cleaning technique. We're trying to get off as much of the loose dust on the surface before we try anything with like a water-based cleaning solution, because if you go on there right away, sometimes all you're doing is like making mud. I mean, you're taking a lot of water and there's a lot of grime on there, and you're just kind of mixing this up. So we want to get off as much as we can in the dry state. And up on the upper left is one of these latex sponges. And then actually on the bottom right is a cosmetic sponge, which is a much finer cell, and it picks up the finer particulates. So we kind of go in stages from the sort of the heavy material and then to the finer stuff. So the whole surface of the mural is given a cleaning that way to lift all that off. And then in this case, because the paintings are oil-based, and in fact, even the gold leaf was applied with an oil, what's called an oil mordant. It's an oil size. It's like an oil coating was put on the wall, and the gold is applied to that surface, to the canvas in this case. So we can confidently go on there because it's oil paint. We can go on there with water. You can't linger forever on it because water will damage, anything if it's left to do its own thing for a period of time. And here you see us using, and Catherine Rodriguez was actually a summer intern. We also take students from the programs who are getting experience as they come out of the graduate schools. They can work in private practice, or they can come, they go to museums sometimes. But this is a great hands-on sort of situation for somebody who hasn't done that sort of thing. In fact, she hadn't been on scaffolding before, so her first few days were she was like, sitting back a bit and not, but you get used to it and you get your land legs up there and you're okay with it. But you can see her here, and basically this is, we're using cotton swabs that we roll ourselves, and they're dipped in a cleaning solution. It's a very mild cleaning solution that is, we actually mix up most of our stuff. There's nothing on the shelf that we use for this sort of thing. And again, it's tailored to the kind of problem that we're trying to deal with. And the kind of cleaning solution what we're using here is a diammonium citrate. It's very good at picking up heavy pollution particles. It locks onto it and lifts it off the surface. We can add things to that and make it stronger or weaker. We can change the pH so it's more acidic or less acidic or much more basic. And again, depending on what you're trying to get off and what the surface of the painting is, you can tailor those things. And it's really important to be able to do that because you can't just take any cleaner and it'll work on everything. That's just not the way it is. So here, just again, a detail showing just the grime coming off the surface. So once that was all done, the third problem that we encountered was, remember I showed you the first image was the one that was in really great condition. The gold was in perfect condition. Several of the murals exhibited this kind of abraded look to the gold backgrounds. Interestingly, the oil paint layers themselves, the figures, didn't show any evidence of that. But gold is it's very thin. I mean, it's, we're talking about microns of thickness. So it doesn't take much to actually wipe gold off the surface if your solution is too strong. And that's what may have happened. So that kind of grid-like pattern of grayness that you see, that's the ground layer underneath the gold that's starting to show through. And this was a bit of a dilemma because we had it, the other end, several of the murals looking really great, and then these ones had obviously undergone something. And again, without getting into an exhaustive sort of technical analysis, which you can do, but that gets really kind of time-consuming and expensive. We still have to deal with it aesthetically in terms of making sure that everything looked whole and consistent across the surface. So one option is to think to yourself, well, here's another image that shows just the problem across the surface. One way to think about it is that, well, we'll just reapply gold leaf to the whole surface. It's often, to that you could do that. It's not complicated. You just, it's a very straightforward thing to do. Actually, it's you just have to buy the gold and do it. But what's problematic is you're dealing with now brand new gold leaf, and the gold leaf that's up there is over 100 years, 120 years old, whatever it is. And almost invariably, you never get a match anyways. You can say, oh, we know that was 23 karat gold, and yeah, you've got 23 karat gold, but the alloys are slightly different. There's a little, of the. And the ability to match it is almost impossible quite often. And you can't go in bit by bit. You'd have to redo the whole thing. And in talking with the library here and the staff about how we would go about it, the director, it didn't really seem like a sensible thing to do in terms of, we would have a mismatch for sure with the other murals. So we took another approach, which is actually to locally restore those areas of that gray kind of damaged area by using, in this case, artists' gold paints, which are actually mica paints. One of the good features about them is that you can thin them down the way you wanted them to go on. You don't have to put them on like solid. You can put them on in washes so that you retain some of the quality of age. Because if you put a solid gold leaf on it, it's going to look brand new. You'd have to do everything, and that then that just changes the whole quality of the thing. And we one of the most important things about what we're trying to retain here is the authenticity of its age. That's what it is. It's now more than a century old, and it has to look that way, or it should look that way. So in this case, we did some experiments, and this is my partner in the business, Corinne Long, and here she's just dabbing some of this. This is kind of artistic at this point in terms of what the work we're doing. It's more of an aesthetic approach, and we're really just trying things out and matching it. The thing about acrylic paint is that the color you mix up is not what's on the wall when it dries. It actually dries slightly darker. Oil paint is really easy. The way you put it on is the way it's going to look. The problem with oil paint is over time it becomes really difficult to remove, and it changes color. It'll darken over time, and it won't match anymore at a certain point. But these acrylics are much more stable. So we felt really comfortable with doing this. And you can see on the upper left here, these are some of the test areas. You can see these blotches of brown and how we're working our way to just knocking them back. And again, you're not looking at 100% perfection, but you're just trying to make those blemishes just recede so that from the floor and from a certain distance, they don't read and show up the way they do presently. And then this is another image where nothing's been done here. It's been cleaned, but you can see the damage sort of issues that we were dealing with. And the next image shows the right half has been toned in. And again, you see there's some modulation there still. It's just, but it's basically going in with a brush and stippling it on and breaking up that surface so that it looks consistent with the rest of the murals. And so the next image, this is kind of shot from below on the scaffold, and you can see the center portion above the figure's head has been done, and the kind of improvement we're getting without making it look brand new again. So this was a lot of fun, actually. It's like that kind of thing where you really make a very impactful kind of decision, and it improves the look of the murals. So those were the three major things, and again, another detail just showing how that was going. And so this corner, the next one I'm going to show you now, was an area that had a lot of that kind of damage, and you can see how the gold just has that appearance that, you know, is consistent with the rest of the murals and the ones that are in good condition. So that was the project, and as it turns out, so this was, as I said, the summer of 2023, and in 2024 we were actually in Michigan, which Geoffrey mentioned again about his other great work at the state capitol, and it was a large project to redo and repair some of the decorative paint going from floor to ceiling. The murals had been worked on in the 1990s, but again, that's like 30 plus years ago. And there were some issues with some of the old restorations, and there was some flaking paint. And so we were up there for about a month doing work on the panels. And that was a lot of fun too. And Geoffrey and I, we briefly met on a visit, way up at the top almost. And unfortunately, there was kind of an entourage and all sorts of other people. And we never really got a chance to catch up on a lot of things, but we plan to do that now after we've done this kind of double presentation here. And I just wanted to show you just some details of these wonderful murals too. And again, the quality of his artistic technique, and the painterly quality, very, very, again, traditional but very inventive in terms of the way he approaches his figures and whatnot. And again, just a couple of details of people working on the mural, doing in painting and varnishing and that kind of thing that was necessary to restore those ones too. So that's all I really have to say. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them, because conservation talks always kind of like, raise other questions. So please go ahead.
About your company, how did you get into that?
So you want to know about me, I guess. Yeah, well, the company has been going on for a while. So one of the things I should tell you about conservation in general is that in Europe, there was a long tradition of basically apprenticeship, and even here in North America, apprenticeship system of how you got into conservation restoration. But in North America in the 70s, well, not in the 70s, it became very formal then, but in the 1930s, 40s, they started thinking more in scientific terms about what was going on with these materials. It wasn't just like a craft anymore. They realized, there are like chemical processes going on that cause these things. Why does a painting split? Why is it flaking? Well, we need to understand what the materials are. So in the 20th century, there was this really a huge buildup of starting to train people in a much more kind of academic and scientific way. As you can see, though, we're still very, grounded in the art world in terms of our backgrounds. And I came from a studio art background. Anyways, there are four actually, master's level programs in North America, 3 in the US, 1 in Canada. And they only take about 12 students a year. And, there aren't that many jobs when you get out, and it's a long training process. And I was very fortunate. I'm actually, I was born in Italy, but I grew up in Canada. But I came to the US in 1989 and on an internship actually at Harvard at the art museums. That's where I first got my foot on the ground in this country. And I was asked to stay on because of other circumstances with staffing there. And I got to luckily stay on there for 15 years. And while I was doing that, kind of like Juglaris, museum jobs don't pay that well. And actually my situation was that I was also not full-time. I was on kind of a contract thing where I would be working full-time, sometimes not working, working half-time. And then in the 90s, we started working on the library murals. And then I was full-time, but so I was doing private work on the side, kind of just running a business just to supplement income. And then in 2004, I was actually hired by the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum to work there, and I worked there for 20 years on the collection. But I also, I was smart of me, I said to them, I'll take that money for 4 days a week, because they wouldn't give me more than what I thought I needed. And that's just a business thing. It's like, you have to always remember that you are worth something out there. And you always need to push for that, like really be strong about your value in terms of what you bring to a situation. So I worked there for 20 years, and so I had the business running basically as a kind of thing, mostly working out of my house, but I would be doing murals and whatnot. And then almost 3 years ago now, I left the Gardner, and the studio is in Lawrence, Massachusetts. We have a big studio space in one of the mill buildings there, and we do obviously mural projects like this, but also your typical canvas paintings and whatnot, portraits, landscapes, whatever. And so far we've been doing really well, which is great to do. And my great pleasure is that Corinne, who's actually you see here, she's been working with me quite a few years, and she's been fabulous to work with, and it's wonderful to just be mentoring a younger generation. And we, like I said, we have summer interns, or what we call third-year interns. Once they graduate, they're looking for experience, and it's one of the great things that keeps me going, to have young people coming in and keeping things lively. And they're learning new things at school, so it's like there's a lot of exchange there, and you're hopefully giving them a lot of confidence in terms of their work too. More questions? Yeah, please.
One is, you mentioned these programs of study. What universities have 3 programs that are...
So in the U.S., the first one that opened up was in Cooperstown. It was State University of New York, Cooperstown. But then they moved to Buffalo must be 15, 20 years ago now. And then there's NYU is the other one. And then the third one is at Winterthur at the University of Delaware. And the fourth one in North America is at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. There's an archaeology program, actually, I should say, that opened up at the Getty. That's the 5th one, but that focuses exclusively, I'm making a mess here, exclusively on archaeological materials, whereas the programs, you can specialize in books or paper, photography, paintings, sculpture, whatever is your interest. Second question.
The question is now, the processes you use to restore these works, have those been cataloged so that this library has that as reference that they absolutely need to keep, right?
Yeah.
So that at future 30, 40 years from now, 50 years
100 years from now, whatever, yeah.
100 years from now.
1,000 years, yeah, hopefully if we're still here, yeah. So one of the important things that I didn't mention it, but you can see that we take a lot of images of what we're doing. So one of the important aspects of our work is what we call the documentation component of it. So even before we even start working on something, we'll come in and examine, which we've done in this space. We'll examine things carefully, get an understanding of what the project is, because the client's going to want to know, well, what are you going to do and how much is it going to cost? And what are we getting for it, really, when you do this? So what we do initially for something like this, and the library can tell you, we actually submit a proposal. And it says, we found this, this, and this, these are the problems, and these are the condition issues that need to be addressed, and here's a rundown of how we're going to go about doing that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, literally. We just spell it all out. And then there's the budget for the work. And so during the process of the work, these murals were very difficult to photograph because you couldn't get far enough, and we were working with the public here, so you couldn't just roll this thing around and run people over. So you had to really stage it so you weren't in the way. So we couldn't do all the photography we wanted to necessarily, but in the studio situation, for example, painting comes in, we photograph it right away. What's its condition? And we take multiple shots. We take raking light shots, which are light coming from a side, so you can see the topography and problems that happen that way. And then as we're working on it, we'll write down a record of what we did and why we did it and what materials were used. And then so the client at the end of it gets a treatment report. So they get the initial condition report budget, and then they get the treatment report. And that again says, this is what we did. We had to change course on this because this isn't what we expected, or whatever changes there were. And we basically spell out all the materials. So in the future, as you say, they're going to know we put this varnish on it, or we used this kind of acrylic paint, or whatever it might be. Because most of the time you get something and it's been restored, we have no clue what, we know something was done to it, but we don't know what was used.
And even know the issues you faced, to have the record of the issues you faced is helpful for anyone down the line.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to say was that what's evolved over the last, let's say, almost 100 years, and it's always easy to, pick on the past, and I'm sure we'll get ours too. But they were limited in the kind of materials they were able to use. There were no synthetic materials, before 1940 or 1950, from a chemistry point of view. So, restorers in those days, like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, they either had watercolor, oil, casein. There were only a few kinds of paint they could use. And as I said, unfortunately, some of those materials are not, even though it's an oil painting and it's nice to restore with oil because it matches really beautifully, it's really hard to get off in the future if you have to do what we call reversing it. So we know with these materials, the varnish, whatever we put on there is easily dissolved and has the least impact on the original surface. That's what we're trying to do. And the materials, we want them to be long lasting, so you don't want to be doing restoration every 20 or 30 years. Because every time you go up there to do something, there's a risk of doing something, there's damage. It's like you touch it, something can go wrong. So we're always thinking, yeah, exactly. So basically, if you can say to yourself, well, I've used materials that I know are going to be good for 100 years, that's a good thing, that nobody has to go up there and touch it. Or maybe give it a light dusting, something not very invasive. Anyways, other questions? There was one here.
Was the gold leaf on the wall, was it put up with the mural that was rolled out and done in the studio, or was the gold leaf added when it was already up on the wall? It would
have been up on the wall. So initially, within the first year of their life, the paint is still quite flexible. And usually they would put on a big tube. It wouldn't be really tightly rolled up. Because if you roll it up like that, you're going to possibly compress it and damage it. And there are rules about how you do that. You always roll the paint face out, although you would think you want to roll it in face in because it's protected. Face out is better because you're not compressing the paint. No, everything is really is still malleable and flexible at that point. And the gold leaf is so thin that it's not even. Structurally doesn't even exist. I mean, we're talking just a few there's nothing there. It's a thousandth of one of your hairs. Thousandth, the dimension of it is a thousandth of a human hair. That's how thin that layer is. And it's so thin, in fact, that you can put different colored grounds on there, red, green, and it imparts a different color to that gold because you're still getting light penetrating and it comes back out. So that's how.
So it's put up on the wall and then the mural is rolled in?
You could. So he would have had these things, as you can see, they're pinned. They were pinned to the wall. He would have had a nice big wall, and the canvas is hanging there or stretched possibly, and he paints away, applies gold or whatever he's doing, and then once he's finished and satisfied, rolled up and installed.
I'm going to ask another question.
Yeah.
Some of the others have commented. There was at one point, it's evident in some of the illustrations here of photographs of early time, thread that encased all of these.
Yeah.
How complicated would it be to, you'd have to, they were all, obviously it was all painted over. It would have to be probably all done anew. Any comment on refretting, so to speak?
So the decorations here that surrounded the murals and up into the ceiling got covered over. And I've been involved in so many projects where there's been off-white paint or whatever put on things that shouldn't have been done. But it was just a thing. Part of it comes from just, is there damage and there isn't the wherewithal or the funding to restore it so the easy thing is just paint it over, and that's fortunately they didn't paint over the murals, so that's a good thing. So the question is what do you do in this situation? You can probably get this overpaint off. It's just really, really time consuming and expensive, and it's repetitive patterns. It's not like a unique figure that you say, well, that we don't know what's under there. We need to uncover that. With things like this, typically what's done is what we do larger exposures. We remove the overpaint to determine what the paint color was, the sort of how it's applied, because it's not just that it's a pattern, but it's how did it actually go on there? What's the sequence of the different colors? Because at that point, what you want to do is replicate it as faithfully as possible. So you would do exposures in all sorts of places to get that all down. And then you would have a decorative painter come in and replicate that. Because it's just not worthwhile. Yeah, we just finished up a project back in the summer, actually, at Old North Church, which I just started telling you before, but then we had to start the program. And that church is 1723, but they knew from their records that in 1727, a decorative painter from London, who actually ended up being a parishioner there, he decorated the interior of Old North Church over a period of 10 years. If you've ever been in there, it's all white, but that's not what it was. It's an Episcopal church. It was decorated. And one of the most significant features above the arches and what are called the spandrels, they're the kind of curved rectangular shapes on the arch, above the arch, there were 20 cherubs and festoons that he'd painted, which survived till 1912. The rest of the church had been redecorated, but these things had survived. And we did this project to uncover all of that, because it ended up being that they were all like unique things. And they're based on kind of English it's like a faux sculpture thing. English churches have sculpture, and this artist wasn't a sculptor, but he painted these faux sculptural cherubs up in these things. And they're really quite, and in that case, it's worthwhile spending the money on it because they are a unique thing. Like next year, they'll be 300 years old. So it's a whole new thing in terms of the way the church looks and understanding of what had happened there. So yeah, there are different approaches you take depending on all sorts of factors like funding and how unique an object is in terms of trying to uncover it. Any other questions? Satisfied? Oh, one more. Well, I guess if we should stop at some point. You say when, Vicky. I just want to make sure we don't overshoot. We're good? Yeah, please.
What's your take on the color of this mural as far as when the artist did it and the way it looks now? To me, it looks very flat.
Yeah, so I'll have to say, be honest with you, we have not done an extensive examination of this space, so I can't say much about it. I'm sure that there's surface grime on it. I mean, everything else has had, because we did the Gallican murals too in 21, 22, whatever that was, and there was quite a bit of grime and dust on it, which is not a surprise.
See, this is obviously a bright flash picture.
Yeah. Yeah, they do have a kind of a dullness on it, so that's one of the things we want to investigate in terms of...
But I can see the artist more like that than that white dress.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah, no, I don't know either. So one of the things is you never make assumptions about anything you're starting to work on.
Do you ever get caught up in saying, okay, I have to fix this crack, but gee, I wish that hair was a little curlier,
No, we don't do that. No, we don't do that. It's the artist's response. They take all responsibility for what they did. No, we don't. No, we don't. One of the things we don't do is try to gussy it up or make it look. It's just you don't do that.
The only other question is, as far as your time, are you pretty good at budgeting your time on it? You go in and say, okay, it's going to take me 6 months. Do you?
Yeah. Yeah. if you do it enough, yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of learning. I mean, I do recall. I worked on studio work it was 2004, 2005, so 20 years ago now. There was a restoration of the central tower of Trinity Church in Boston on Copley Square, and those are the Lafarge murals that are in there. So, yeah, how do you get up? It's like 105 feet up to get up there, but they actually installed one of those rigs for window washing, and we were going up and down the interior of the church to examine, but we were only looking at I guess 1/8 of the total surface that we had to deal with. And we were going up and down, checking everything and doing cleaning tests and, where is there flaking paint and what has to be restored. And the decorative painters also had to work with us side by side. And I remember I had a young recent graduate, and we went for coffee, and she said to me, so how are you going to figure out how much time this is all going to take? And quite literally, I said, well, you know how much, if there's a square foot of a painting and it's cleaning this way, how long is that going to take you to do? Is it 15 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? Is it an hour? What is it exactly? And it can change. It depends on, the situation. And I said, basically, in this situation, we're going to just count all the square footage and come up with a baseline of what we think it's going to take to clean everything. And how much repair is there in terms of flaking paint? And how much restoration do we have to do? And you come up with a budget, and sometimes you miss. Sometimes you're under. And you eat some of that. Now there are situations where you make discoveries that you couldn't have imagined. So you go back to the client and you say, we found this, and but on something like this is much more straightforward because you can access pretty well everything. So you can come up with a very good budget. But it's experience. It's like anything. You just learn over the years how to make sure that you. And the nice thing is too is, like I said, we have students. So where we can help with the client is being able to. The budget can adjust itself to, well, we're hiring students at a certain rate rather than paying me for that rate. So, you can, you don't charge the full rate necessarily for that. So you can budget that into it and say, we can get more hours done because we have, people who are training with us. They're very good. They may be not as quick as you are, but they're still much, it's much more effective, cost effective for the client. So there are lots of ways that you can work that out with budgets. But it isn't easy sometimes. Sometimes you just, you miss, which is fine. It's fine.
Did I hear you say that you will actually be working on the restoration of this reading room?
I don't know. Well, I suspect that this will be something at some point. I don't know when that'll be. As I said, this space has to be looked at in a very comprehensive kind of way. It's not just the murals, because the murals were incorporated within a decoration. So it would be kind of, you could do it. You could clean the murals, but you still haven't gotten back to what the original intent was. And if the library wants to go back to the original intent, then they'll have to consider, okay, now we need to do some exploration and what was the original design, and do we want to do that, and what's that going to cost, and that's. But that's up to the library. That's when they let us know.
Was there awareness? Let me ask this other question. Was there awareness when you were working in the Michigan State Capitol that there was a connection between these two sites? Did you have any awareness of that?
Oh yeah, no, I knew it at that point. Yeah, at that point it became, oh yeah, this is like the same artist. Yeah, no, it was interesting just to. Because I read up on the discovery. It's like, wow. It's like, it was astonishing to me that, he was expunged from the record.
This library was the reason why we found out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a phenomenal story, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, I suppose somebody would have figured it out at some point, but it's great that you did. So it's like, somebody had to do it, and it's, well done.
Is there a point at which you don't fully restore something? So in antiquities, if there's too much missing,
Yeah. Yeah, great question, yeah. So I think everybody heard that about just, there comes a point where sometimes you can't, if something's significantly damaged or lost. How many of you have been to Italy? So you've probably seen murals, like mural cycles, frescoes, where there are just chunks of figures missing. There was no photography in 1450 or 1320. So if a head's missing, what is it? So in that case, what they've done, they go for this kind of neutral kind of sketching in a form lightly, but making it evident that that's restoration and it's not the original. In terms of sculptures in the 18th, 19th century, they were actually, if an arm was missing, they would just recreate the arm and stick it on there. But nobody knows exactly if that's what it was. And now there's a trend to no, that shouldn't be there, because that's just conjecture, really. Even if it's beautifully sculpted, you're still just making it up. So yeah, there comes a point where, and I've worked on mural projects where, because construction, reconfiguration of doorways and things, all of a sudden something's missing that, what do we put there? So we'll put it in a neutral, so if something had been cut out of here or badly damaged, you'd put it in a neutral kind of background to make it just recede. It's not just a white wall or whatever. And, you're honest about the fact that that's just gone and you can't do anything about it.
because they do that in Egypt, if there's a certain percentage.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just, for example, if one of these, an arm is, half missing, I mean, you can connect the dots, but there comes a point where you can't connect them anymore, and you just can't push it anymore, because it just gets, it's makeup. And, what are you doing? So we stay away from that, really. Although in the past, they would try to restore things much more heavy-handedly than we do now. It's just, accepting again what the artist did and what the age of what's happened has happened, and we have to accept that. All right, well, thank you. A lot of questions, thank you.